Hi Patreon viewers. So I think an interesting little subject here, but I'm not gonna, this isn't gonna be a major view, but it's gonna be a little insight, I guess, into my collecting habits and future subjects that we're coming up on the public channel. And that is the subject of Indian, I'll call them for now, but that's what I'm going to talk about, Indian shields made of leather. I will also point out, do I have any down? No, I don't at the moment, but of course the Dal, or Indian shield, Indo-Persian shield, does also come in steel, but the ones that particularly catch my interest at the moment are the leather ones for a number of reasons, but partly also because a lot of the metallic ones, so you find brass ones, which are basically decorative things, they're wall hanging objects for the most part, I think. You find steel ones, and some of those are decorative and some of those are real, but the leather ones pretty much are just real. Not to say that some weren't made also for decorative purposes, but they are basically functional items, and they're for fighting with. And leather has many advantages over the metallic shields, primarily that it's light. And in terms of strength against weight, the leather, I believe, for a shield is a better trade-off than, for example, the steel ones. The steel ones, to make them protective enough that they don't get sort of easily sort of bashed up and or even penetrated, you need to make them of a certain thickness, and then they become relatively heavy. These leather shields can be tough and flexible and also very light. Obviously, I actually haven't weighed this, but I can tell you that this is made of some sort of rawhide. I'd imagine buffalo or something like that, looking at the thickness of it. But we're going to look at a couple of others in a minute, and you'll notice it's still got one of the grips attached. Obviously the leather ones don't survive as well as the metal ones because they are more fragile and they're more prone to the damp, being eaten by animals and grubs and bugs, mold, fungus, that kind of stuff. And they're less decorative. They're not the sort of thing that an average person, I'm not an average person, would want to hang on their wall, unlike the pretty steel ones with all Koftgari decoration, or the brass shiny ones. These are not the sort of thing that most people want in their house, luckily for me. But I have to say that means there's fewer of them around, or at least they're harder to find. So yeah, this has got steel rings, traditional Indo-Persian construction, so you've essentially got bolts, not bolts, kind of rivet, more like rivets really, with a ring on one side, ring, the handles are attached to the rings. As you can see, this leather has gone completely stiff, and then a pad in the centre, and it would be gripped with the two grips pulled together, kind of like a buckler, well, exactly like a buckler in fact. And so there's no central boss because the attachment points for the handles are here, and instead of your hand going into the boss, the hand is pushed into the pad at the back. That has some advantages and disadvantages with the buckler, which I won't go into here actually, because that's a fairly complicated topic, and I've spoken a little bit about it in the past. So leather Indian Dals is something that I'm on the lookout for, but the one thing I wanted to say, let's have a look at another one actually before I start going into that. So here's another one. Now this is quite contrasting in a number of ways, but primarily because it is not light. This is heavy and it is super, super thick. Now I can only imagine, looking at the texture of that skin and the thickness of that skin, that is super thick. I can only imagine that is from rhinoceros or hippo, or possibly elephant. I think it could be from any of those three, but it's from a very, very large animal that has extremely thick skin. And I suspect the toughness of that, I suspect you'd have trouble getting certain pistol bullets through that. I think it's probably bulletproof against pistols. Very, very tough. And we know there are actually accounts from the Sudan, obviously far, far away from India, but they also used hippo hide shields in the Sudan, and they were reckoned to stop a 45 caliber British pistol revolver round. So yeah, much thicker hide, much heavier thing, but you'll see basically the setup is the same on the back. The only difference is, for some unknown reason, there is a fifth boss in the center, which you sometimes get. I don't believe that has any functional purpose at all, other than maybe looking cool. Sometimes these rondels around here are quite decorative. These do have some file work. This is quite a rare thing, and you can see the grips the leather's all very, very stiff and quite fragile, it has to be said. But you've got the pad, you've got the grips. It's exactly the same setup as the last one. You know, gripped in the same way and everything else. So they're pretty impressive things, and they're purely, as you can see, they're utilitarian. They're for fighting with. They're not very decorative, and they're quite, you know, grubby and everything else. Then I have two others down here. I'll just show you one, but they're both very similar to each other. And these are a similar setup. These don't have the grips remaining on here, but they do have the pad, they do have the four rings. You'll notice these are much less substantial, and that is probably partly because despite the fact that these are leather, these are much thinner leather, and they may have been made with the then tourist market, the British Raj, in mind. So they might be late 19th century, and you can see that, well, I hope you can see anyway, that they've got hunting scenes on there. Let's see if we can get so they've got tigers hunting horses, it looks like, or maybe they're deer. Maybe they're deer actually. But there we go, you can see there's a tiger grabbing something that's rubbed off, and then there's one of the whatever animals they are hunting or running away there, and another tiger grabbing, that one's a deer actually, you can see the antlers, so maybe they're different animals. But beautifully rendered, and very rare things to survive because, you know, for all the aforementioned reasons. But what I wanted to say before we wrap up is that these, generally speaking, are, I mean, we can see from the decoration on that last one, that's Indian, no question. But when we look at the period artwork and photography, which of course we have from the 1850s onwards, we've got photography from various reaches of the British Empire and French empires and Portuguese and Spanish empires, and we can see that these shields weren't just used in India, and that's why we refer to them as Indo-Persian, because actually they were a style of shield that was very popular over a very wide area, that was areas that were influenced by Indian and Persian, and you've got to remember between India and Persia is Afghanistan, so Indo-Persian influence, the sphere of Indo-Persian influence, and that includes Kula-Kud helmets, Tolwar swords, all sorts of things. So you do find those types of shields as far away as the Philippines. You do find them in very similar shields in Turkey, all over the Middle East, Persia obviously, Afghanistan, and Nepal, Burma, so all around India as well, Sri Lanka. So actually that type of shield, which had been around for centuries, was incredibly widespread, and I think they're kind of underappreciated things. You probably know the modern replica one that is used for sparring that I have hanging up on my garage door, and they're fun things to use, really practical, really nice shields. They combine a lot of the benefits of different types of shields into one object. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting, and I'll see you guys soon for another Patreon video before the end of the month, and of course on the public channel. Cheers folks.